My hands trembled as I stood at the front of the conference room, the weight of a year's worth of sleepless nights pressing down on my shoulders. The prototype sat on the table, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, a physical embodiment of every sacrifice I'd made. My boss hovered near the door, eyes darting between me and the client, a woman whose reputation for making or breaking careers was legendary. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues burning into my back, their forced smiles barely masking the tension in the air. This was supposed to be my moment. The moment I proved myself, not just to the company, but to everyone who'd ever doubted me. I took a deep breath, forcing a smile as I began my pitch, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. The client leaned forward, curiosity flickering in her eyes. I pressed the button to activate the prototype, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself speak. And then, in an instant, everything unraveled. The prototype sputtered, lights flickering erratically before a thin wisp of smoke curled from its side. A sharp, metallic pop echoed through the room. The client recoiled, her expression shifting from intrigue to disappointment. My boss's face twisted in horror. My colleagues exchanged glances, some stifling smirks, others feigning shock. I felt the blood drain from my face as humiliation washed over me. Every ounce of confidence I'd built evaporated, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape the judgment in their eyes. The client stood, gathering her things, and for a moment I was certain I'd just witnessed the death of my career. But as I stared at the ruined prototype, something inside me refused to break. I didn't know it yet, but this disaster was only the beginning. I thought this was the end of my career. But what happened next changed everything. Long before that disastrous meeting, my life had been defined by a relentless curiosity. As a child, I was the one who took apart radios and toasters, not out of malice, but because I needed to know how things worked. My parents, both teachers, encouraged my questions, even when they didn't have the answers. I remember the pride in my father's eyes the first time I fixed the old blender, and the way my mother would save broken gadgets for me to tinker with. That sense of wonder never left me. It grew into a passion for invention, a drive to create something meaningful, something that could change lives. College was a blur of late nights, coffee-stained notebooks, and endless trial and error. I thrived on the challenge, the thrill of turning ideas into reality. When I landed my job at the tech firm, it felt like the culmination of everything I'd worked for. I was determined to prove myself, to show that I belonged in a world dominated by egos and ambition. At first, I was welcomed with polite smiles and cautious optimism. My manager, Mr. Hargrove, seemed impressed by my portfolio. But I quickly learned that in this office, talent was both an asset and a threat. The team was tight-knit, but not in the way that fostered collaboration. There was an unspoken hierarchy, and newcomers were expected to know their place. I tried to fit in, to be friendly without overstepping, but it didn't take long to notice the subtle jabs, the way my ideas were sometimes dismissed only to resurface later as someone else's. The worst of it came from two colleagues, Mark and Lila. Mark was charming on the surface, always quick with a joke, but his compliments often felt like veiled insults. Lila, on the other hand, was fiercely competitive, her ambition barely concealed beneath a veneer of professionalism. They'd been with the company for years, and their partnership was legendary, at least, that's what everyone said. I admired their confidence, even as I sensed the undercurrent of rivalry. Still, I poured myself into my work. The prototype became my obsession, a project I nurtured from concept sketches to working model. I spent weekends in the lab, missing family gatherings and birthdays, driven by the belief that this invention could be my breakthrough. My friends joked that I was married to my work, and maybe they were right. But I didn't mind the sacrifices. I believed they would be worth it. As the client meeting approached, the pressure mounted. This wasn't just any client. This was the one everyone wanted to impress, the one whose endorsement could launch careers. The office buzzed with anticipation, and for the first time, I felt the weight of expectation settle on my shoulders. Mr. Hargrove called me into his office, his tone unusually serious. "This is your shot," he said. "Don't let us down." I worked late every night, double-checking every connection, every line of code. But as the deadline loomed, I started to notice things that didn't add up. Tools went missing, files were mysteriously corrupted, and once I found the prototype's casing slightly ajar, as if someone had tampered with it. I tried to brush off my suspicions, telling myself I was just paranoid, but the unease lingered. Mark and Lila's behavior grew stranger, too. They offered to help more often, hovering around my workstation, asking pointed questions about the prototype's design. Their smiles seemed sharper, their laughter a little too forced. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that my colleagues wouldn't stoop so low. But the tension in the office was palpable, a silent battle being waged beneath the surface. Despite it all, I clung to hope. I told myself that hard work and integrity would win out, that the prototype would speak for itself. I rehearsed my presentation until I could recite it in my sleep, determined to make the most of this opportunity. I had no idea just how far some people would go to see me fail. The week before the presentation, the air in the office grew thick with anticipation. I was running on adrenaline and caffeine, determined to make every detail perfect. But as the days ticked by, a series of small, unsettling incidents began to chip away at my confidence. It started with a missing component, a specialized microchip I'd ordered weeks in advance. I tore apart my workstation, convinced I'd misplaced it, but it was nowhere to be found. Mark wandered by, hands in his pockets, and offered a sympathetic smile. "You know how chaotic things get before a big pitch," he said, but his eyes lingered on the empty spot where the chip should have been. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just bad luck. But then, the prototype software began to glitch. Lines of code I triple-checked suddenly threw up errors. Lila stopped by my desk, her tone casual as she asked, "You sure you're ready for the big day?" Wouldn't want any surprises. Her words echoed in my mind long after she walked away. The unease grew with each passing hour. I started locking up the prototype at night, double-checking every connection before I left. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My colleagues' conversations would hush when I entered the break room, and I caught Mark and Lila exchanging glances more than once. Even Mr. Hargrove seemed on edge, his encouragement tinged with impatience. 2 days before the meeting, I found a tiny scratch on the prototype's casing, barely noticeable, but I knew every inch of that device. My heart pounded as I inspected it, searching for other signs of tampering. I wanted to confront Mark and Lila, to demand answers, but I had no proof. Instead, I poured myself into last-minute fixes, determined to outwork whatever obstacles were being thrown in my path. The night before the presentation, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the prototype failing, my career unraveling in front of everyone. I tried to brush off the warning signs, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The morning of the presentation dawned gray and heavy, the kind of day where the sky seems to press down on the city. I arrived at the office before sunrise, my mind racing with checklists and contingency plans. The building was eerily quiet, the usual hum of early risers replaced by a silence that felt almost ominous. I unlocked the lab, heart pounding, and immediately checked the prototype. Everything appeared to be in order. I ran a quick diagnostic, watching the familiar lights blink in sequence, and let out a shaky breath. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe today would go smoothly after all. But as the rest of the team trickled in, the atmosphere shifted. Mark strolled in with his usual swagger, coffee in hand, and offered a too bright good luck today. Lila followed, her heels clicking sharply against the tile, her eyes scanning the room before settling on me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I tried to focus on my notes, but their presence felt suffocating. The hours crawled by as we prepared the conference room. I double-checked every cable, every connection, refusing to leave anything to chance. Mark hovered nearby, offering to help set up the display. I declined, forcing a polite smile, but he lingered anyway, making small talk that felt more like a distraction than genuine support. Lila busied herself with the refreshments, but I caught her glancing at the prototype more than once, her expression unreadable. As the client's arrival drew near, my anxiety spiked. I excused myself to the restroom, splashing cold water on my face and staring at my reflection. "You've got this," I whispered, trying to steady my nerves. But when I returned, I noticed something odd, a faint smudge on the prototype's casing, as if someone had handled it with greasy fingers. My stomach twisted, but I pushed the thought aside. There was no time for second guessing. The client arrived right on schedule, her presence commanding the room. She shook hands with Mr. Hargrove, exchanged pleasantries with Mark and Lila, and finally turned to me. Her gaze was sharp, assessing, but not unkind. I introduced myself, my voice steadier than I felt, and launched into my presentation. I explained the inspiration behind the prototype, the challenges I'd overcome, the potential impact it could have. For a moment, I lost myself in the passion that had fueled this project from the start. But as I moved to demonstrate the prototype, a cold wave of dread washed over me. The device felt different in my hands, heavier, somehow, and the power button seemed slightly askew. I hesitated, glancing at Mark and Lila. Mark's lips twitched in a barely concealed smirk. Lila's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place, anticipation, maybe, or satisfaction. I pressed the button, praying that my fears were unfounded. The prototype whirred to life, lights blinking in their familiar pattern. Relief flooded me for a split second, until the lights began to flicker erratically. The device sputtered, emitting a high-pitched whine, and then, with a sickening pop, a thin wisp of smoke curled from its side. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the smoking prototype. My heart plummeted. I tried to recover, fumbling for an explanation, but the damage was done. The client's expression hardened, her interest replaced by disappointment. Mr. Hargrove looked as if he might explode. Mark and Lila exchanged glances, their faces masks of concern, but I saw the triumph in their eyes. I felt utterly exposed, every insecurity laid bare in front of the people whose opinions mattered most. I wanted to scream, to accuse, to demand answers, but I was paralyzed by shock and humiliation. The client stood, gathering her things with a curt nod. "Thank you for your time," she said, her tone icy. Mr. Hargrove mumbled an apology, his gaze avoiding mine. As the room emptied, Mark clapped me on the shoulder, his grip just a little too tight. "Tough break," he murmured, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Lila offered a tight-lipped smile, her eyes glittering with satisfaction. I was left alone with the ruined prototype, the smell of burnt plastic hanging in the air. I replayed every moment in my mind, searching for what I'd missed. The smudge, the shifted button, the uneasy glances, they all pointed to the same conclusion, but I had no proof. All I had was the crushing weight of failure and the knowledge that I'd been set up. As I unveiled my life's work, I had no idea I was walking into a trap. The silence after the prototype's failure was deafening. I stood frozen, my hand still hovering over the smoldering device, my mind blank with disbelief. The client's face was unreadable, her lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced from the ruined prototype to me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a flush of humiliation that made my skin prickle. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting for an explanation I couldn't give. Mark was the first to break the silence. He let out a low whistle, shaking his head as if in disbelief. "Wow, I've never seen it do that before," he said, his voice laced with concern. "Did you change something last minute?" His words were casual, but the implication was clear. Lila chimed in, her tone sympathetic, but her eyes cold. "It's such a shame. You worked so hard on this. Maybe it was just too ambitious for the timeline." Their words stung more than the failure itself. I wanted to shout to accuse them of sabotage, but I knew how it would look: paranoid, desperate, unprofessional. Instead, I stood there, swallowing my anger, my fists clenched at my sides. Mr. Hargrove avoided my gaze, his disappointment palpable. "We'll have to regroup," he muttered, already moving toward the door. The client gathered her things, her expression unreadable, and for a moment I thought she might say something, offer a word of comfort, or at least a hint of understanding. But she simply nodded, thanked us for our time, and turned to leave. As the room emptied, Mark and Lila lingered, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Mark patted my shoulder, his touch lingering just a moment too long. "Don't take it too hard," he said, his voice low. "Not everyone's cut out for this kind of pressure." Lila offered a tight smile, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. Maybe next time, you'll let us help a little more, she said, her words twisting the knife. I felt the weight of their betrayal settle over me, heavy and suffocating. Every late night, every missed family dinner, every ounce of hope I'd poured into this project, it all felt wasted. I could see my dreams slipping away, dissolving into the air like the smoke still curling from the prototype. I wanted to disappear, to escape the judgment and the pity in their eyes. I wanted to scream, to demand justice, but all I could do was stand there, numb and defeated. The humiliation was complete. I could already imagine the whispers that would ripple through the office, the rumors that would follow me from one project to the next. I'd become a cautionary tale, a warning to anyone who dared to dream too big. My confidence, so carefully built over years of hard work, crumbled in an instant. But as I gathered my things, head bowed, the client paused at the door. She turned back, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of curiosity, or maybe something more. I wanted to disappear. But then, the client did something I never expected. The client's heels clicked against the tile as she paused in the doorway, her back to the room. For a moment, I thought she was simply gathering her composure before leaving for good. But then she turned, her eyes sweeping over the scene, the ruined prototype, the lingering smoke, Mark and Lila's carefully composed faces, and finally me, still clutching my notes with trembling hands. She walked back into the room, her expression unreadable. "May I ask you a few questions?" she said, her voice calm but commanding. The room stilled. Mark and Lila exchanged a quick glance, their confidence wavering for the first time. I nodded, unsure if I could trust my voice. The client approached the table, examining the prototype with a practiced eye. She didn't flinch at the damage or the acrid smell. Instead, she looked at me. "How long did you work on this?" she asked. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "Almost a year. I designed every component myself. I wanted to create something that could make a real difference." She nodded, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "And you were the only one working on it?" Mark stepped forward, eager to insert himself. "We all contributed, of course. It was a team effort. But he gestured at me, was the lead." The client's lips twitched, as if she found his answer amusing. Interesting, because I noticed something odd. She pointed to the casing, where the smudge still lingered. This device was tampered with. The screws on this side are mismatched, and the power button is misaligned. That doesn't happen by accident. A hush fell over the room. Mark's face paled, and Lila's eyes darted to the floor. I felt a surge of hope, so sudden it almost hurt. The client continued, her tone sharper now. "I've seen enough presentations to know when something's off, and I pay attention to details. I watched you during the demonstration. You were surprised by the malfunction. But your colleagues," she glanced at Mark and Lila, "seemed almost prepared." Mark stammered, I don't know what you mean. We were just as shocked as anyone." The client ignored him, turning her full attention to me. "Tell me, did you notice anything strange leading up to today?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. For so long, I'd been afraid to speak up, afraid of sounding paranoid or ungrateful. But now, with the client's steady gaze urging me on, I found my voice. "Yes," I said quietly. "Parts went missing. The software glitched in ways I couldn't explain. I found the casing open once, but I thought maybe I'd just been careless. I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof." The client nodded, her expression softening. "That's what I thought." She turned to Mr. Hargrove, who had been standing silently in the corner, his face a mask of confusion and concern. "I suggest you look into your team's internal dynamics. Sabotage is a serious accusation, but I trust my instincts." Mr. Hargrove looked stunned, his eyes darting between me and my colleagues. Mark and Lila stood frozen, their earlier bravado gone. The client turned back to me, her voice gentle now. "You showed integrity. You didn't point fingers or make excuses, even when it would have been easy. That tells me more about your character than any flawless demonstration ever could." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, a mix of relief and vindication washing over me. For the first time since the disaster, I allowed myself to hope. The client reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek business card. She held it out to me, her smile genuine. "I'd like to speak with you privately. I have a project in mind that could use someone with your vision and your resilience. Would you mind giving me your card?" The room seemed to tilt. Mark's mouth fell open and Lila's composure shattered, her face flushing with disbelief. Mr. Hargrove looked as if he'd just witnessed a miracle. I fumbled for my own card, hands shaking, and handed it to the client. She took it with a nod, slipping it into her pocket. "I'll be in touch," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "And don't worry about today. I know talent when I see it. Sometimes, adversity reveals more than success ever could." As she left the room, the tension broke like a dam. Mark and Lila stood in stunned silence, their carefully constructed facade crumbling. Mr. Hargrove finally found his voice, stammering apologies and promises to investigate. But I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, my heart pounding with a wild, unfamiliar sense of possibility. For so long, I believed that one failure could erase everything I'd worked for. But in that moment, I realized that the truth has a way of coming to light, even when others try to bury it. My saboteurs' faces fell as the client turned to me with a smile. The days that followed felt surreal, as if I were living in someone else's story. Word of the client's reaction spread quickly through the office, and the atmosphere shifted almost overnight. Mr. Hargrove called me into his office, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. He apologized for doubting me, admitting that he should have trusted my instincts. An internal review was launched, and it didn't take long for the truth to surface. Security footage revealed Mark and Lila lingering in the lab after hours, their actions caught on camera as they tampered with the prototype. The evidence was undeniable. Mark and Lila were suspended immediately, their reputations in tatters. The whispers that once followed me now trailed after them, and the office that had once felt so cold and hostile suddenly seemed to rally around me. Colleagues who had kept their distance offered words of support, some even apologizing for not speaking up sooner. It was bittersweet, knowing how quickly loyalties could shift, but I welcomed the change. For the first time, I felt seen not just as a cautionary tale, but as someone who had survived and come out stronger. The client kept her promise. She reached out within a week, inviting me to discuss her new project. Our conversation was nothing like the tense, formal meetings I'd grown used to. She spoke to me as an equal, valuing my ideas and encouraging my creativity. She offered me a position on her team, one that would allow me to lead my own projects and shape the future of her company's innovation. The offer was more than I'd dared to dream, and I accepted with gratitude and excitement. With each passing day, my confidence grew. I realized that the humiliation I'd endured had forged a new resilience within me. I no longer second-guessed my instincts or shrank from challenges. Instead, I embraced them, knowing that I had already survived the worst. The betrayal that once haunted me became a lesson, a reminder that integrity and perseverance matter, even when it feels like the world is against you. As I packed up my things on my last day at the old office, I felt a sense of closure. I wasn't leaving in defeat, but in triumph. I had faced sabotage, humiliation, and doubt, but I had refused to let them define me. For the first time, I realized that integrity really does pay off. Months have passed since that day, but the memory of it still lingers, less as a wound and more as a reminder of how far I've come. My new role is everything I once dreamed of: creative freedom, a supportive team, and the chance to see my ideas come to life without fear of sabotage. The client who once saw through the smoke and lies has become a mentor, someone who challenges me to grow and trusts me to lead. I wake up each morning excited for what's ahead, no longer weighed down by anxiety or self-doubt. Looking back, I see now that the betrayal I endured was a turning point, not an ending. It forced me to confront my own worth, to stand up for myself even when my voice trembled. I learned that trust is precious, and that not everyone will have your best interests at heart, but that doesn't mean you should stop believing in yourself. Resilience isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up, even when you're bruised and shaken. I've met others along the way who have their own stories of being underestimated, or pushed aside. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Your value isn't determined by the people who try to tear you down. Sometimes, the very thing meant to break you becomes the catalyst for your greatest growth. I'm living proof that you can rise from humiliation and heartbreak, stronger and more certain of who you are. If you've ever been betrayed, remember, sometimes your lowest moment is just the beginning of your comeback.